Imagine this: a man draped in mystery, adored by millions, feared by critics, and chased by the spotlight. The king of pop, Michael Jackson, steps off a plane in 1996, his presence electrifying the air of a city still healing from decades of division. Prague, the heart of the Czech Republic, had never seen anything like him. Thousands of fans flood the streets, climbing rooftops, hanging from lampposts, their voices echoing through the historic avenues. To them, Michael Jackson wasn't just a performer. He was hope. He was freedom. He was something almost mythical, but behind the glittering stage lights, behind the deafening roar of stadiums filled with screaming fans, Michael Jackson was carrying a different mission. One few ever witnessed. One that revealed a side of him hidden from the spotlight. This is the untold story of Michael Jackson in Prague, 1996. A story not about concerts or charts, but about a man who, for a few fleeting moments, became something far more than an entertainer. He became a healer. Before we go further, pause for a second. Ask yourself this. How well do we really know Michael Jackson? Was he only the king of pop, defined by moonwalks and sold-out stadiums? Or was there another Michael, a man whose quiet acts of compassion were overshadowed by the noise of fame? Stay with us. Because what you're about to hear will change the way you see Michael Jackson forever, and if you want more stories that uncover the truth behind legends like Michael, make sure you subscribe, like, and share this video, because some legacies deserve to be remembered the right way. The summer of 1996. Michael Jackson's History World Tour was one of the most ambitious undertakings in music history. Prague was chosen as the opening city, a symbolic choice for a region that had only recently emerged from the shadow of the Cold War. On the night of September 7, over 125,000 people gathered at Letná Park, one of the largest crowds Michael had ever performed for. The city had never seen such chaos, such beauty, such unity, but while the world remembers the spectacle, few remember what happened the morning after. Away from the cameras, Michael Jackson quietly slipped into a place most celebrities would never dare to go, the Motol Trauma Center, a children's hospital in Prague. Picture the scene. Sterile white walls. The faint smell of antiseptic. Rows of metal beds lined with thin sheets. Children, some bandaged, some frail, some barely able to sit upright, watched in silence as a man in a black fedora and military-style jacket entered the ward. The room seemed to freeze. Nurses held their breath. Doctors exchanged glances. For many of those children, their lives had been a cycle of illness and pain. But in that moment, something shifted. Michael didn't walk in as the superstar who had just entertained a stadium of 125,000. He walked in as a man who simply wanted to touch lives. He bent down to greet each child, placing his gloved hand gently on their heads, whispering words of comfort. To one boy sitting upright, clutching a toy car, Michael rested his hand on the child's hair, smiling with a warmth that seemed to melt the sterile cold of the hospital.no cameras. No stage lights. Just Michael and the children, and yet, hidden within this quiet visit was something even deeper. Michael Jackson didn't just tour hospitals out of obligation. He funded them. He donated millions through his Heal the World Foundation. In Prague, he left behind not only gifts, but resources that would continue to serve those children long after he had left the city. But the real twist? Michael's hospital visits weren't publicized the way his concerts were. The mainstream media barely mentioned them. They focused on controversies, on rumors, on scandals that sold papers. Meanwhile, these acts of kindness remained in the shadows. Did Michael intend for it to be this way? Was he protecting himself from accusations of self-promotion? Or was he simply doing what his heart demanded, whether the world noticed or not? Let's pause again. Imagine being one of those children in that ward. Your body weak, your spirit fading, and suddenly the king of pop kneels beside you, not as an icon, but as a human being who sees you, really sees you. How would that moment change your life? But Michael's journey in Prague didn't stop there. Just days later, he visited an orphanage in Zbraslav, a small town on the outskirts of the city. For children who had been abandoned, forgotten, or left behind by society, Michael's presence was overwhelming. Some cried. Some stared in disbelief. Some simply reached out to touch his hand, as if to confirm he was real. What's striking is how Michael moved through those rooms. He didn't rush. He didn't hide behind assistants. He lingered. He listened. He gave the most precious thing a superstar could offer, time, and here's the paradox. On stage, Michael Jackson was larger than life, commanding armies of dancers, fireworks, and roaring crowds. But off stage, in places like Zbraslav, he seemed smaller, quieter, almost fragile. It was as if these visits revealed the truest version of Michael, the boy who never truly had a childhood, giving pieces of that stolen innocence back to children who needed it most. Why don't we talk about this Michael more often? Is it because the world prefers spectacle over sincerity? Because scandal sells more than compassion? Or because we, as fans, never looked closely enough? The truth is, Michael Jackson's legacy isn't just thriller, bad, or dangerous. It's these hidden acts of humanity, scattered across the globe, often unseen, often uncelebrated. Prague in 1996 was just one chapter. But it's a chapter that reveals a secret thread woven through his entire life. Think about it, every city on that world tour, Michael found a hospital, an orphanage, or a community in need. He carried not only music, but healing. Some called it charity. Some called it a public relations stunt. But for the children who met him, it was something else entirely. It was hope. There's a haunting irony in this story. Decades later, Michael's reputation would be dragged through the mud, his compassion questioned, his motives dissected. But for those who were there in that hospital in Prague, or in that orphanage in Zbraslav, the truth was simple. Michael Jackson cared. And they never forgot it. Now, let's pull back and ask ourselves, what does this reveal about Michael Jackson? Was he, perhaps, a man trying to heal others because he couldn't fully heal himself? Was his relentless giving a way of filling the void left by his stolen childhood? Or was he, in some divine twist of fate, chosen to be both the most celebrated and the most misunderstood artist of all time? These are questions without easy answers. But one thing remains undeniable. In 1996, in Prague, behind the glittering mask of stardom, Michael Jackson revealed his most human self. So the next time you think of Michael Jackson, don't just remember the moonwalk, the sequined glove, or the earth-shaking concerts. Remember the quiet hospital ward in Prague. Remember the orphanage in Zbraslav. Remember the children whose lives were forever touched by a man the world thought they already knew, because the truth is, we didn't. If you believe Michael Jackson's real story deserves to be heard, share this video. Let the world remember not just the king of pop, but the king of compassion. And if you want more stories that reveal the hidden truths behind music's greatest legends, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment below. Tell us, what do you believe was the real Michael Jackson? Because sometimes, the greatest stories aren't the ones told under stadium lights. They're the ones whispered in hospital rooms, where hope is given in silence. This was Michael Jackson in Prague, 1996. And this was the king of pop's quietest, yet loudest performance. The story of Michael Jackson in Prague cannot be told only through the lens of flashing cameras and sold-out stadiums. To truly understand what unfolded in 1996, we must step back in time. Prague, in the mid-90s, was a city in transition. Just a few years earlier, it had shaken off the heavy chains of communism. The Velvet Revolution had brought democracy, freedom, and a rush of new possibilities. But scars of the past still lingered. Crumbling buildings, struggling institutions, and children who carried the weight of poverty and neglect. It was a city reborn, yet still fragile. Into this landscape came Michael Jackson, a figure so surreal that many couldn't believe he was real. When news broke that Prague would host the opening of the History World Tour, excitement swept across the nation like wildfire. Fans camped outside Letná Park for days, some traveling hundreds of miles. For a city that had endured silence and censorship, the thought of Michael Jackson performing was nothing short of miraculous. September 7, 1996. The day of the concert. Over 125,000 fans filled the park, spilling into streets, climbing rooftops, clinging to any surface that offered a view. The air vibrated with anticipation. And when Michael rose onto that stage, dressed in gold and black, standing motionless for minutes as the crowd erupted, Prague witnessed a spectacle it would never forget. But this story is not about that concert. It is about what happened in the quieter moments, the ones history books and tabloids rarely mention. The morning after the concert, when most superstars would have been resting in luxury suites, Michael Jackson did something different. Surrounded by a small team, he drove to Motol University Hospital, one of the largest medical centers in Prague. The hospital's trauma center for children had seen better days. Equipment was outdated. Beds were old. And yet, the children inside those walls carried a resilience that no hardship could erase. As Michael stepped into the ward, whispers spread among the staff. Nurses straightened their uniforms. Doctors fell silent. Children, some with IVs attached, lifted their heads in disbelief. To them, Michael Jackson wasn't just a celebrity, he was a legend, a figure they had only seen on TV screens or heard through cassette tapes passed from hand to hand, and now, here he was. Michael moved slowly through the room, as if aware of the fragility of the space. He stopped by each bed, offering a smile, a touch, sometimes a gentle laugh. One boy, no older than 8, sat upright clutching a small toy car. Michael placed his hand softly on the boy's head, bending down to meet his eyes. The boy's lips trembled. He had been in the hospital for months, fighting injuries that had left him withdrawn and quiet. Yet in that instant, with Michael's hand resting on his hair, his face lit up. For Michael, this was not a photo opportunity. There were no rehearsed smiles, no staged interactions. These moments were raw. Genuine, and it's here that the real Michael Jackson begins to emerge, not the performer, not the superstar, but the man. The man who, despite carrying the weight of his own trauma, chose to spend his time easing the pain of others. Hidden in plain sight, Michael had always carried a second mission alongside his music: to heal. Through his Heal the World Foundation, he donated millions to hospitals, orphanages, and disaster relief around the globe. In Prague, he quietly funded improvements for the Children's Trauma Center, ensuring that the visit was not just symbolic, but lasting. But why, you may ask, did the world not know this side of him? Why were these visits buried beneath layers of headlines about scandals and controversies? The answer is as complicated as Michael himself. Perhaps the media wasn't interested in kindness. Perhaps the world wasn't ready to see Michael Jackson as vulnerable, as human. Or perhaps Michael himself preferred it that way, choosing to give without demanding recognition. Let's pause here. Imagine yourself as one of those children. Your body frail, your spirit weighed down, and suddenly the most famous man in the world kneels beside you. Not rushing, not distracted, but fully present. How would that moment reshape your understanding of hope? Yet Prague was not finished revealing Michael's compassion. Just days later, he visited an orphanage in Zbraslav, on the outskirts of the city. The orphanage housed children who had been abandoned, neglected, or left behind by families unable to care for them. For them, Michael's arrival was a miracle. Some children clung to him instantly, wrapping their arms around his legs. Others stared in awe, too shy to approach. Michael, with his soft voice and gentle demeanor, met each child at their level. He sat on the floor. He listened. He laughed. He handed out toys and gifts, but more importantly, he offered time, the one thing so many of those children had been denied. The scene was almost cinematic. A man who had grown up under blinding stage lights, deprived of his own childhood, now pouring that stolen innocence back into the lives of children who needed it most. It wasn't just charity. It was restoration, but there is a haunting question that lingers. Did Michael give so much because he was trying to heal others, or because he was trying to heal himself? Was each hospital visit, each orphanage embrace, a reflection of the boy inside Michael who never got to play, never got to be held, never got to be ordinary? This is the paradox of Michael Jackson. To the world, he was untouchable, an icon, a spectacle. Yet in these quiet moments, he was achingly human, fragile, and desperately reaching for connection. and this is where the story twists. Years later, the world would turn on him. Accusations, scandals, endless scrutiny. His compassion was questioned, his motives twisted. Yet for those children in Prague, there was no question. They didn't see controversy. They didn't see the king of pop. They saw a man who cared. And decades later, many of them still remember that day as one of the brightest moments of their lives. So ask yourself, why do we, as a society, remember the spectacle but forget the compassion? Why do the controversies overshadow the kindness? Michael Jackson's visit to Prague in 1996 was more than a tour stop. It was a glimpse into his soul. A reminder that behind the music, behind the moonwalk, behind the glittering glove, was a man who gave when no one was looking, and perhaps, that is the legacy we should remember. If you believe Michael Jackson's real story deserves to be told, don't let it end here. Share this video. Keep the memory of his compassion alive. And make sure to subscribe and comment below, what do you think was the true heart of Michael Jackson, because sometimes, the most powerful performances don't happen under stadium lights. They happen in silence, in hospital wards, in orphanages where hope is reborn. This was Michael Jackson in Prague, 1996. And this was the king of pop's quietest, yet most unforgettable encore. The story of Michael Jackson in Prague does not begin on the stage. It begins in the air, even before his feet touched Czech soil. On September 4, 1996, as his private jet descended over the rooftops of Prague, tens of thousands of fans swarmed the airport. They clutched banners, waved flags, and chanted his name as though they were summoning a myth. Some had not slept for days, camped outside fences just for a fleeting glimpse of the man they believed was larger than life. When Michael finally appeared, stepping down the stairs in his signature fedora and military jacket, the screams shook the tarmac. Children on their parents' shoulders wept. Adults reached through barriers, desperate to touch the air he breathed. It wasn't just excitement. It was reverence. For Prague, a city still rediscovering its freedom after years of silence, Michael Jackson embodied everything they had longed for: color, sound, possibility. And yet, Michael's first act was not to bask in the adoration. Instead, he waved humbly, eyes soft, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He seemed almost shy, as though the tidal wave of love was too much to carry. In that moment, you could see it, the contrast between Michael the global icon, and Michael the man, forever struggling to reconcile the two. The city erupted in celebration. Newspapers declared his arrival the biggest cultural event since the Velvet Revolution. Hotels overflowed with international fans. The streets pulsed with energy. But beneath the surface of spectacle, Michael was already planning something else. Something quieter. Something that revealed the man behind the myth. 2 days later, on September 7, history was made. Letná Park, a massive open space overlooking the Vltava River, became the stage for one of the largest concerts Michael had ever performed. Over 125,000 people gathered, their voices echoing like thunder through the cobblestone streets of Prague. From the moment Michael appeared on stage, standing motionless for nearly 2 minutes as the crowd roared, the city was electrified. Fireworks exploded. Music shook the earth. For 2 hours, Prague was not just a city. It was the center of the universe. But after the lights dimmed, after the stage was dismantled, after the crowds drifted home, Michael Jackson did not retreat into luxury. He did something almost no one expected. He slipped away from the grandeur and into the heart of the city, where lives were far removed from the glamour of global tours. The morning after the concert, Michael arrived at Motol University Hospital. The Children's Trauma Center was stark, its walls lined with white paint that had long begun to fade. Beds were crowded close together. Machines hummed weakly, some older than the doctors who operated them. For many of the children, this was not just a place of healing. It was a place of waiting. Waiting for hope. Waiting for something, anything, that might remind them the world outside had not forgotten them. And then Michael Jackson walked through the door. The room froze. Nurses pressed their hands to their mouths. Parents stood in disbelief. Children, their eyes wide, clutched at their blankets as the king of pop approached. But he did not come in with fanfare. No cameras flashing, no entourage blocking the way. He came in quietly. Gently. Almost reverently, as if he understood he was stepping into sacred ground. Michael bent low to speak with the children. He held their hands, brushed their hair, whispered words of comfort. One boy, unable to walk, began to cry as Michael touched his head. Another girl, weak from treatment, smiled for the first time in weeks when Michael handed her a toy. Staff later said the ward felt different that day, lighter, warmer, as though hope itself had entered alongside him, but Michael's presence wasn't symbolic. He made sure the hospital received donations to modernize equipment, to bring care closer to what the children deserved. Through his Heal the World Foundation, he quietly left behind resources that would continue to serve long after his plane departed. Still, he asked for no recognition. No press release. No headlines. He simply did what he felt was right. This is the side of Michael Jackson the world rarely saw. A man who had been denied a childhood of his own, spending his adulthood trying to give pieces of that innocence back to others, but Prague wasn't finished revealing Michael's heart. Days later, he traveled to Zbraslav, a small town just outside the city, to visit an orphanage. These children were not only sick, they were abandoned. Left behind by parents who could not care for them, by a system still struggling to rebuild after decades of oppression, Michael entered the orphanage with the same quiet humility. The children swarmed him, some crying, some simply staring in disbelief. Imagine being a child who had been told the world had no place for you, and suddenly, the most famous man alive kneels beside you, smiles at you, and says you matter. Michael sat on the floor with them. He played games. He handed out toys. He hugged children who had gone years without affection. For hours, he gave them what they needed most. His time that it was not lost on those watching that Michael himself had once been a child star, thrust into the spotlight before he could understand what childhood even meant. Perhaps that is why he lingered. Why he looked into their eyes with such intensity. He knew what it meant to be small, powerless, voiceless. And he vowed never to let another child feel that way, not if he could help it. And yet, here lies the tragedy. For all his acts of kindness, for all the hospitals and orphanages he visited around the world, the narrative that followed Michael Jackson was not one of compassion. The media preferred spectacle, scandal, controversy. The man who gave millions, who visited the forgotten, who built playgrounds and donated wings to hospitals, this man was overshadowed by whispers and accusations, but in Prague, the truth was clear. Ask those who were there. Ask the doctors who saw their patients light up with joy. Ask the orphans who, for one unforgettable day, felt like the most important children in the world. To them, Michael Jackson was not a scandal. He was salvation. Why do we forget this Michael? Why do we choose to remember only the noise, and not the silence where his real legacy lived? The answer may be simple: kindness doesn't sell newspapers. But that doesn't mean kindness disappears. The children of Prague, now adults, still carry those memories. Some still speak of that day as the moment their lives changed. For them, Michael Jackson's visit was not about fame. It was about humanity, and that brings us to a haunting question: did Michael give so much because he was trying to heal others, or because he was trying to heal himself? Was each visit to a hospital or orphanage a way of reaching the childhood he never had? Was the king of pop, beneath all the glitter, simply a boy still searching for comfort? Perhaps that is why his acts of kindness feel so raw, so unfiltered. Because they weren't charity in the traditional sense. They were pieces of Michael's own story, given freely to children who reminded him of himself. And so, as the history tour moved on from Prague to Budapest, Warsaw, Munich, and beyond, the spectacle continued. But behind the fireworks and choreography, Michael carried the same ritual. In nearly every city, he found a hospital. An orphanage. A place where his presence might spark hope. It was as if the music and the healing were inseparable. Each tour stop not just a performance, but a pilgrimage. Prague was the first. And perhaps the most symbolic. A city healing from history, visited by a man forever trying to heal himself. Together, They created a story that deserves to be remembered. So the next time you hear Michael Jackson's name, don't just think of the moonwalk, the diamond glove, the sold-out stadiums. Think of the children in Motol Hospital. Think of the orphans in Zbraslav. Think of the quiet moments where the king of pop's true crown was not fame, but compassion, because sometimes the greatest performances don't happen under stadium lights. They happen in silence, in whispered words to a child, in a gentle hand resting on a small head. This was Michael Jackson in Prague, 1996. And this was his most powerful encore. If you believe Michael Jackson's story deserves to live forever, don't just watch this video. Share it. Let the world remember the man behind the myth. The king of pop, and the king of compassion.